Hi, in this video I'd like to introduce a suite of tools called mgTools that help you to export data from Maya to Unreal Engine. So it handles assets, animations, skeleton, all kinds of data as well as layouts, and then sets all of that stuff up for you in Unreal Engine. This is just a brief overview, but there is more detailed documentation with a link in the description of this video. If we come over here, there are a bunch of tools up here for tagging. You can see like this yellow tag. And so I'm going to go through some of those. And that's the main task that you have to do in Maya, is to tag objects so that the tools know what kind of objects they are. So for example, I have this van set up. This is a skeletal mesh and a skeleton. If I select the top joint, click on this tag button, this first one, it will see that this is a joint chain and there's a skin cluster on it. So it will tag this object as a skeleton. It has a UE tag and the value of it is skeleton. Similarly, if you want to remove a tag from this object, I want to remove a UE tag or Unreal Engine tag, I can just click on this button to remove the tag. Now I could also take this geometry and click on the second tag that has an A on it. This is to tag this as an alembic. Usually I would use this for deforming objects or simulations, like simulated objects. So I would use this if you have something that is being deformed using like lattices or clusters or other deformers that can't be translated as a skinned like FBX object, or objects that have been created with a simulation, like a cloth simulation, for example. But just as an example to show you how to use it is, you would take the geometry or the group above it and tag it with this A tag, which is an alembic tag. And so now that this is tagged, if I go to these extra attributes, the UE tag is alembic. And this tag over here with an M on it is for metahumans. So if I have a metahuman, I have a metahuman here that I exported from Bridge, and I ran my custom body controls creation tools, which are also available on my website, to create this control rig. So if I go to mgTools, I don't need to select anything if I'm using the metahuman tagger. I'll just click it, and what it does is it tags the two items that you would use to export animation from a metahuman, and that is this body root. And so if I go to extra attributes, it has a UE tag of metahuman body. And it also has an optional variant override. So oftentimes I may have one character that has multiple costumes, and so I can put the variant override in here, which is basically it's the name of the blueprint that I want to be used for the metahuman if I don't want to use the default blueprint that is for this character. So like this character is named UMAP. Let's say I don't want to use BP underscore UMAP for this character. I want to use BP underscore UMAP traditional clothes. And so I'll write, UMAP underscore traditional clothes, and then that's the blueprint that will end up being loaded when I bring this animation into Unreal Engine. Similarly, you can use an entirely different metahuman, like a different character. It doesn't even have to be this character. And it will then load the animation onto that one in Unreal Engine. Hopefully that makes sense. And the other thing that it tags is the facial controls set, and it tags that as metahuman face. So I like to do this in my rigged file for the metahuman, and then I'll save this, and when I'm working on a shot, I will reference this file into the shot. So your metahuman is already tagged. When it comes to exporting using this Unreal Export tool over here, it will actually look through the whole scene file, see what is tagged with the UE tag, what type of tag does it have, and it will use the appropriate actions to export that data out. So we'll get to that in a little more detail in just a moment. Let's talk about layouts. So we're still talking about like tagging objects. So for layouts, we're using static meshes. And so when you import static meshes into Unreal Engine, you don't want to import multiple copies of the same object. Oftentimes when you have an environment, you may have a wall piece, for example, or a doorway piece or a door object, that is used multiple times in your environment. So what I like to do is I'll create a sort of library of objects for a particular environment. So each of these objects is in here only one time. There's one copy of each object in this group over here. So we have a category name, in this case ENV for environment. That's one group. Under that group we have the asset name or the group name. And so this is what the asset will be called. It's also what my Maya file is called. And this lets the tools know how to bring this data into Unreal Engine. And all of this data I've been showing so far is asset data. So I use a Maya project that I set up, and I put all of these in a subfolder in there called assets, and with different categories like ENV for environment, char for character, prop for props, and so on. And then you have these objects in folders under that. There's more detail on that on the documentation page for these tools. But each of these objects, this sort of library of objects, is going to be exported as a static mesh. So these are not skinned objects, these are just static meshes. So I'm going to select all of these objects and click on the tag tool, and it's going to see that they are not skinned, they are not joints, they are just mesh objects, and so it will know to tag them as static meshes. Now here I'm looking at, I think, the shape node. So the tag is going to be on the transform node. Now I'm just showing you the tag. You don't actually have to look at the tag, it's still going to work, but it's good to know kind of how this is set up. So this UE tag that I added says static mesh, and so each of these objects, when I use this Unreal export, is going to be, so I'll select these and I can single click this and it will export each of these tagged objects as an FBX file. Now these objects have all been prepared, their pivots have been prepared using this tool over here, which preps selected objects pivots for Unreal. So what that does, I'll just show you an example. So let's just hide this for a moment. So if you notice, like each of these objects is at the origin. They're all on top of each other. This is our library of parts. So in order for objects to be exported correctly with their pivots still matching what we see in Unreal, this is what we have to do. So I have a tool to help with this. So let's say, we got this cube over here, and let's make it a little bigger. Okay, and so let's say this is an object that I've created, and I'll rotate it around like this is just some object I made. Now what I want to do is correct its pivot so that it will work correctly as a sort of library object or asset that I'll export, so that it will work correctly in Unreal Engine. And you'll understand this a little bit more when I get to the actual layout portion of this. But to prepare this object, I will prepare the pivot using this tool. And what it's done is it's brought it to the origin, it put the pivot at the origin and put it at the base of the bounding box of this object. And then it also did a freeze transform. So now this object would be one that I could add to this library of parts, so these assets here. Now let's just display that. Okay, so now that's at the center. So now let's say with all these parts I want to make a layout because I'm going to be animating characters and things with these scenes, with this environment here. So let's hide these environment parts and look at the layout group. So I created a layout group which basically has duplicates or copies of the objects that were in this environment group over here. And they have the same name as the original object, except that I've added an underscore and a number. So you just need an underscore at the end, and then you can just have numbered objects. And so, you know, like some of these walls are used twice, like this is like blank wall, you know, number 1. This is blank wall number 2. I can adjust the translation, rotation, and scale any way that I want and lay out my scene. But what's going to happen is when I use the Unreal Export with these objects selected, like I said, this button here, Unreal Export, it's going to export individual FBX files because they're tagged as static meshes. I'm going to make sure that none of these objects in the layout group are tagged. So just in case, I can just click this untag button over here with those selected. And for these, I'm going to use this JSON lay export, so JSON layout export tool. It's going to export a JSON file, which is kind of like a text file, that has all the names of these objects, and it has all the transform information. So when you bring it into Unreal Engine, you would simply export these sort of library of parts as assets that you'd import into Unreal, and then you'd export like your nice little JSON layout file for these objects. And because the names match, except for this underscore and a number after it, the tools will be able to find the original objects, duplicate them, rotate them, scale them, whatever you did in your layout, apply that, and load all of them up in your level. So this is the preparation side of that. I'm going to show you this next button over here. It's just a little bone, and this is for creating skeletal definitions. So let's say, particularly if you have character rigs, but the example I'll show you here is of a van. But let's say you have this rig and you want to use this skeleton multiple times. So skeletal definition in Unreal Engine is basically the exact names of the joints and the hierarchy that they're in. So oftentimes if you have a character skeleton, you don't have to do this with metahumans because they're already set up that way, like with my tools and also within Unreal. But let's say you have a custom skeleton of some kind of a character, and you have multiple characters that use that same skeleton. So in order to be able to easily share animation between your characters that share the same skeleton, you want to create a skeletal definition. So this tool over here helps you to do just that. So with this root joint selected, I can click on this skeletal definition tool here. And if you look at the bottom, it says create skeleton definition based on selected root joint. So we're going to click it. And we're going to give a name for the skeleton. So what is the skeleton? You know, this is my SP van skeleton. So it could be the name of a particular character rig that you're using. It could be like your advanced skeleton or your, you know, custom whatever name of your skeleton that you use. So I'm calling this one SP van just as an example. And what it's doing is exporting this as a skell as the category, and this will make more sense when I show it to you in the Unreal project. But basically it's exporting an FBX and a JSON file, but it's putting it in a special category called skell. So instead of like vehicle under assets, it's going to be skell as in skeleton. Saving a skeleton definition exports the FBX and JSON file, but it also exports a file here, an additional JSON file under where the MadGuru tools live, wherever you have installed them. It creates a subfolder called skeleton definitions, and if we open this up, it's basically got a list of the joints that make up this skeleton. So what happens is when you are exporting a skeleton, it will check, the tools will check this folder for any of the JSON files that you've saved out of skeleton definitions to see if any of them are a match. If they are, then it's going to tell the tools that this is a specific type of skeleton. So we're going to search for that skeleton in Unreal Engine and use that as the type of skeleton for this. And that's how you can get shared skeletons. Once you have tagged these assets, you save them, you reference them into another scene file where you're going to animate everything. And so in this file, I have all this animation on the controls for the metahumans. I can double click on this Unreal export and it will look for all the objects in the scene that have an Unreal tag and export them. Or I can select objects that have tags, like the ones that I actually want to export. Maybe I only want to export, re-export like the body animation for one of the characters. So I can just select like the body root that is tagged as a metahuman body, and I can single click this button and it will only export that. And within shots, you can tag your camera. So if you select a camera, click on the tag button, it will tag it as a UE tag with the value of camera. And those two will be exported like that. So now I'm going to show you kind of the structure of the files that get exported. So there aren't too many rules to like the folder structure that's expected by the tools, but there is one thing that you need to do, and that is to have an assets folder and a scenes folder. I do this by setting up a Maya project, and that creates all these folders for me. So under assets, we have these subcategories. They don't have to have these same names. The names just have to match the groups in your Maya scene files. You can check out the documentation for more details on these tools. But in this case, I have like characters, environments, props, vehicles. So under vehicles, I have like this van. Under props, I have a baton, shoes, a flagpole, a bunch of different things. And these characters in this case are all metahumans. So I have the names of the metahumans in here. And environments have the various environments that I've created. And so let's get an idea of the types of files that are exported here. So if I go to under character, so for metahumans, you don't really need to export anything related to the actual metahuman that was created by Bridge, because you export that separately into Unreal. You just need the names to match, which they should if you've not changed them. But if you want to export additional clothes and things like that, you can definitely export that here. And the export tools will basically create a subfolder called output that lives under whichever file you're exporting. So let's say for this baton, I exported the rig. So I had this file open when I exported, and it exported to a subfolder that it created called output. And in that folder, I have a JSON file that tells the tools how to handle this object, and I have an FBX file that gets imported into Unreal Engine. And that's also the case for environments. So let's say like that room. Go to my published folder. This is the file that I exported. So as an output, each of those individual objects has an FBX file, and then there's one file that contains a list of all of these and what type of objects they are, the source file, all that kind of stuff. This is what we load into Unreal Engine, and it knows to grab all of these FBX files and bring them in. Now, next to the file, instead of in the output folder, is the layout file. So I exported the layout, like the position, rotation, of all of the objects that I laid out to create that environment. And so this matches your Maya file that I exported from, and it just has an underscore layout and .json at the end. So all of these files are what we end up importing into Unreal Engine. So once you've installed the tools, you'll have a new menu called mgTools. And from here, it's pretty simple. You just have a few tools. Because you have all of the information about those assets and animation and stuff in the JSON files, the tools are able to figure out how to handle importing that data. So after you've exported your data out of Maya, you come to Unreal Engine, and if you've installed the tools correctly, you'll have a new menu called mgTools. And there are just a few buttons in here. So the first option is the one that you'll be using the most, and it's called Import Maya Data. So select that, and it's going to open up a dialog, and it's filtering for JSON files. So we're going to go over to our Maya project, and under Assets, I'm going to go over to, let's say, like the environment, and I can navigate over to that room and go to my output folder, and I just see the JSON file for that room. So I can open this, and because in Maya I had it under Assets, it's going to import under Assets here. I had a category named group above the objects with another group underneath it that had the asset name. So like environment, Uyghur homeroom. And so when I import, it actually brings in all the geometry. Now, I've actually updated these materials by adding all the textures and things, but if you have materials applied in your FBX, it will bring in empty materials or search for those materials with the same names in here. The import process brought in each individual FBX file as a static mesh. So all these objects are now in here, basically your library of parts for that environment. In that same folder, you can actually put it wherever you want, but I just found it easy to put it within the same folder as the environment meshes. So I have a level that I created, and I simply named it the same as this asset for this environment, and I added the word underscore layout underscore level at the end of it. And so I open that up, and here you can see everything's already laid out, but the way that I did that was I imported the Maya layout tool. So if you remember, the layout tool actually from Maya exported a JSON file of the layout of that room. And that layout lives under the Maya project. This is an asset, an environment, just the home room. And I actually exported it. I exported the layout JSON file here. It actually automatically exported to the same location as the Maya scene file you're exporting from. So when I loaded this layout JSON file using import Maya layout from mgTools, what it did was within the folder for this environment, it searched for all of these objects. So for example, like this apple. So these apple objects are in here. We have apple A, apple B, apple C, and apple D. So in the layout, they had that underscore and then a number after them. So it brought all of these in, and it placed them in the scene just as they were in Maya. And then these walls, we had blank, like wall blank 0, 1, and then we had wall blank 0, 2. So these are from the same object duplicated and with different transforms. Anyway, so all of these objects were then instanced from our sort of asset library and placed correctly within here. So for shot animation, it looks more like this. When you import animation, so I have some body animation for these metahumans, and then I have an Alembic file, which is imported as a geometry cache. So these are all things that were tagged in Maya. So when I imported those JSON files using import Maya data, I'll show you what that looks like. So in this case, we're going to go to the Maya project, scenes, because this is shot animation. We're going to go to scene 2, shot 30, and we're going to look at the output folder. And so these are the JSON files that got output. So we have the facial controls, like the facial animation for both characters, and we have the body animation for both characters. We have the camera. We have a JSON file that is for the necklace, and then we have a JSON for the room, but we don't really need to bring in that one. That's just a layout. This is what the imported shot data looks like. So you could see in the content browser. So this is what the shot data imported into Unreal looks like. It's going to be under your SEQ or sequence folder, and then because our folder structure on the Maya side had a scene folder and a shot folder, it matched that. And when I imported this animation using import Maya data, it automatically created the level and this level sequence for this shot. It brought in the animation, and it, for most types of animation, is able to apply the animation in here. There are a few steps that I'm trying to figure out in terms of coding. Sometimes not everything in Unreal is accessible via Python, or sometimes not easily accessible. So I'm figuring out how to add this body and animation. For now, I'm doing those steps manually. But what the script does is it brings in the correct blueprints for the characters, for metahumans, and then what I do is I add a body and a face track to it, and then I run the script again, and it adds the animation to it, and I manually add the face control rig and apply the animation to it. For other skeletal meshes, the scripts will actually grab the asset. So let's say, like for this van, for example, we have under assets, we have vehicle, this van. And when we use that in a shot, like this one, when we import the FBX animation, it knows to look for that asset, place that asset in the level and the level sequence, and then apply the animation from this FBX to it. So here's an example of a skeletal mesh asset that was brought in from the asset folder, and then the FBX animation for the shot was applied to it as a track in the level sequence. So the scripts actually did that. For metahumans, there are a few steps that I'm still trying to figure out how to automate them using Python. And in the meantime, when you import the metahuman animation, it will look for the blueprint of that character, and if you've supplied a variation, it'll grab that. It'll put the blueprint in here, but there's, you could say, kind of a bug with the Python command at the moment, where it does not bring in these actor components. So these were manually added back in, and so I spoke to folks at Epic, and they were planning on implementing this within that Python command to allow it to maintain these actor components. But for now, if you're using the scripts, then you would just hit the plus, add the body, add the face, and then you can run the script again. It will see that there's body. It'll add the animation track to it. For the face, that part is not automated yet. You would simply add the face board, as I've done over here, the face control board, and then you just use the usual import control rig. So on the Maya side, all of that exporting data is automated. It's working. On the Unreal side, with the metahumans, there's just a few steps that are manual, but from the Maya side, it's still kind of automatically exporting data for you. it'll continue to evolve and develop. I'm going to continue to develop these tools as I work on my own animations and projects, and continue to support users of these tools as well. Thanks a lot for watching this video. Feel free to leave a comment if you have any questions. These tools are available for purchase now, and if you are a user of my MetaHumans tools, you know that I really try hard to provide good support and timely updates to tools, and definitely listen to user feedback and help people out when they're using these tools. So with that, thank you for watching this video. Bye.